We are about to dive deep into one of the most powerful and, frankly, terrifying forces on Earth. When an earthquake hits, the solid ground we take for granted suddenly betrays us. So let's pull back the curtain and really understand what makes our planet shake. And that's where we have to start, right? With that feeling. That sudden, gut-wrenching moment when you realize everything is moving. This quote just nails the raw human side of it all. It's a powerful reminder that we live on a very, very active planet. So let's move from the feeling to the facts. What is actually happening beneath our feet? Let's break down what an earthquake is, and you might be surprised to learn just how often they're happening. Okay, so at its core, an earthquake is just a sudden, violent release of energy. Think of it like snapping a giant rubber band deep underground. That energy has to go somewhere, and it travels out in waves. Two terms you'll hear a lot are the focus, that's the actual spot underground where the rock breaks, and the epicenter, which is the point on the surface directly above it. That's usually where the shaking is the strongest. Get ready for this number: 500,000. That's how many earthquakes our planet experiences every single year that we can actually detect. Now, look, most of these are so small you'd never even feel them. But it just goes to show you, the ground beneath our feet is never truly still. The potential for a big one is always simmering somewhere. So that leads to the big question, right? Why? What is this massive engine deep inside the Earth that's driving all of this constant activity? What's causing all this energy to build up and then release? You know, the best analogy I've ever heard for the Earth's structure is a hard-boiled egg. Seriously, you've got the yolk as the hot core, the egg white as the thick middle layer, and then that thin, cracked shell on the outside, that's the Earth's crust. And we're all just living on one of those cracked pieces. And those pieces of the eggshell are what we call tectonic plates. They're these enormous slabs of rock that are floating and slowly moving around. And where they meet, where they scrape and grind against each other, those are the boundaries we call faults. And faults are where all the action happens. And when we say where the action happens, we really mean one place in particular. A whopping 90% of all earthquakes occur along something called the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's this massive horseshoe-shaped zone that circles the Pacific Ocean, and it's basically the planet's premier hotspot for seismic fireworks. So how does that energy actually get unleashed? Well, it's a process you can feel in your own hands. Imagine you're pushing two rough bricks together. They don't slide smoothly, right? They stick. That's the fault being locked. But you keep pushing, and the pressure builds and builds and builds until snap. The friction gives way, the bricks jump forward, and all that stored energy is released in an instant. That snap, that is the earthquake. And not all faults are created equal. The way the plates move defines the fault. You have normal faults where the ground is being pulled apart. You have strike-slip faults, like the famous San Andreas, where plates slide past each other horizontally. But the real monsters, those are the reverse or thrust faults. That's where one plate is literally being shoved up over another, creating the conditions for the most powerful earthquakes on the planet. Okay, so the fault has snapped, the energy is released, but it doesn't just stay put. It explodes outwards, traveling through the rock as seismic waves. And it's these waves reaching the surface that cause the destruction we see. Now, there are two main characters in this story, P waves and S waves. Think of it like thunder and lightning. The P waves are like the flash of lightning. They're the fastest and they arrive first. You feel them as a sudden jolt or compression. But the S waves, they're the thunder. They're slower, but they carry the real destructive power, shaking the ground up and down and side to side. When the S waves hit, that's when things really start to fall apart. And the damage goes way beyond just shaking buildings. That intense vibration can cause something called soil liquefaction, where solid ground literally starts behaving like a liquid. It can trigger city-sized landslides, and if the quake happens under the ocean, it can unleash a devastating tsunami. On top of all that, you get secondary effects, like fires from broken gas lines, which can be just as deadly as the quake itself. And to understand just how catastrophic this can be, look at this example from history. In 1556, the Shaanxi earthquake became the deadliest ever recorded. A huge reason for the death toll was that many people lived in cave dwellings carved into soft cliffs. When the shaking started, their own homes collapsed in on them. It's just a brutal reminder that it's often not the earthquake that kills people, but our own buildings. So, after hearing about an event that immense, you have to wonder, how do we even begin to measure or compare earthquakes? How can we talk about their power in a way that makes sense? Most of us have heard of the Richter scale, but here's the part that's so easy to miss. It's a logarithmic scale. That's a fancy way of saying that the difference between a magnitude 6 and a magnitude 7 isn't 1. It means the magnitude 7 quake caused 10 times more ground shaking than the 6. It's a huge leap. But here's where it gets really mind-blowing. Let's talk about energy. That magnitude 7 quake, it doesn't release 10 times more energy than the 6. It releases about 32 times more energy. And a magnitude 8, it releases almost 1,000 times more energy than a magnitude 6. That exponential jump is why higher magnitude quakes are just on a completely different level of destruction. And what's the biggest one we've ever seen? So far, the title goes to the 1960 earthquake in Valdivia, Chile. It registered a 9.5 on the scale. The amount of energy released by that single event is almost impossible to comprehend. All right, so knowing all this, knowing the cause, the power, the sheer scale of these events, it can feel a little hopeless. But it's not. So what can we actually do? How do we live on these active fault lines? And that is the ultimate question, isn't it? We are never going to stop the tectonic plates from moving. So the entire game becomes about survival and resilience. How do we ride out the storm? Well, a big part of the answer lies in brilliant engineering. For a long time, we just bolted buildings to the ground as tightly as possible. But during a quake, that just transfers all the violent shaking right into the structure. The modern solution is incredible. It's called base isolation. You essentially put the building on flexible pads or bearings, almost like a car's suspension. The ground can shake like crazy underneath, but the building itself stays much, much calmer. And some buildings take it to a whole other level. You've probably heard of the Taipei 101 skyscraper. Well, hanging inside the top of it is a 660-ton steel ball. It's a giant pendulum. When an earthquake or a typhoon makes the building sway in one direction, this massive ball swings in the opposite direction, canceling out much of the motion. It's absolutely genius. But look, it's not all about massive skyscrapers and high-tech engineering. What you do personally is just as important. Simple things: strapping your heavy bookshelves to the wall, knowing exactly where to shut off your gas and water mains, having an emergency kit and a family plan. These are the things that will make the real difference in the first few minutes and hours after a quake. And really, that's the thought I want to leave you with. For millions of people living in places like California, Japan, or Chile, the science is crystal clear. The big one isn't a possibility, it's an inevitability. It's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And so the only question left for us to answer is, are we ready for it?